Well, a lot of the regulars here have lost out on their vote from last season because it's a manager special in the EFL Championship, our first of the regular season. And 2024-25 sees us beat the record of last year as Paul Heckingbottom is appointed the new first team manager at Preston North End, replacing Ryan Lowe, who left the club after just one game this season. There's been a lot of talk about that on and off the pitch, particularly with Peter Ridsdale. We'll get to all the situations in a minute. And of course, as always with this EFL Championship Manager specials, we'll have a talk about the old man, then the new man, and what we expect for the club moving forward. If you're a Preston fan, if you're a Championship fan, we'd love to get yours in the comments as well. Let us know what you think of the decisions, the changes, and how you think Heckingbottom gets on. But before we go and move on to him, firstly, a quick apology for the delay because Preston waited until an hour before I made the trip to Yorkshire yesterday to watch one of the worst games of football I've ever seen, by the way, to announce this appointment, even though we knew it was coming the day before. You can see what I predicted for the weekend for Preston up in the eye above, which unfortunately was also before the decision. But let's talk about the old man before we focus on the new. And that man is Ryan Lowe, who, let's be honest about it here, is a manager who I've got mixed feelings on because he has played entertaining football at some of his clubs before. But last season, that didn't really happen at Preston. He was one of the longest serving managers in the EFL, ridiculously, at about 2.5 years. He did have a pretty decent record at Preston North End, winning and losing the exact same number from his 125 games. But I think we covered the key base last year, and the reason why I think quite a lot of fans, despite him doing pretty well last season in terms of results, were a little bit happy to see this news, which was, it just wasn't entertaining to watch. We've talked about it before, and we've seen at the back of last season, Achin in Akali at Hull wanting a more exciting style of football. Norwich getting rid of David Wagner after he reached the playoffs because they wanted a better style of football. And Ryan Lowe, while it wasn't a club decision, as Peter Ridsdale said, there were a side that were pretty turgid to watch at times last year. So I can understand the frustration that we've seen from a lot of the fans in the comments since his departure from the club. But there's no denying from a results point of view and from a club point of view, he did okay with a squad that, in my opinion, probably finished slightly above where it should have last year, albeit with a pretty poor finish to the season. They had that brilliant start in the 23-24 season, top after 8 games with 7 wins and a draw. But then when they started playing the top half sides regularly, they got found out regularly. And the 2 runs they had in the season, generally speaking, were against the sides that were largely in that bottom third. So they beat the teams you'd largely expect them to beat. They struggled against most of the sides you'd expect them to. But I can understand from a fan point of view, if you're a club that has loitered in mid-table for a number of years, would you take finishing 3 or 4 positions lower for a bit more of an exciting brand of football? Perhaps you would. Obviously, the club didn't want it to be that way. Seemingly, they'd persuaded him to stay in the summer. Seemingly, he'd made the decision to go. And it was, in his defence, a little bit of a slow transfer window, slow to get going and make improvements to the squad, albeit he did, in the end, start to get the targets he'd wanted. So I can understand from both sides of the fence why the club would have been happy for him to stay and why the fans are maybe not too disappointed that he's gone. But overall, nearly a 40% win record. To be fair to him, his CV's excellent. Did a good job at Bury with a promotion, did a good job at Plymouth with a promotion, and certainly hasn't underachieved with Preston in terms of results if you take them in isolation. But maybe the football certainly nowhere near as entertaining as it was at Plymouth Argyle, which, to be fair, a lot of Plymouth fans did later credit Stephen Schumacher. But with that out the way and the old era gone at Preston North End, the new manager bounce is of course arriving right in time for the game against Luton. Thanks for that, guys. Because Paul Heckingbottom is the club's new first team manager. Let's have a little look through the statement, which of course mentions that he'll be joined by his assistant Stuart McCall. They obviously allude to that brilliant promotion he achieved in 22-23, despite being limited in the transfer market because of scenes off the pitch at Sheffield United. And perhaps he was harshly sacked when you saw what happened after, with Chris Wilder in the Premier League. But either way, Sheffield United weren't staying up last year. Paul Heckingbottom, though, really delighted to be at the club. Talks about experience, knowing a lot of the players at the club. A couple of them he'd signed at Barnsley after promotion to the Championship back in, what would it have been now, 2017? Obviously had slightly less successful stints at Leeds and Hibernian after, albeit Hibs haven't really got better in the 5 years since, and did a wonderful job at Sheffield United to take them up from the Championship when they were in a little bit of upheaval off the pitch. And Look, Preston aren't going to be the side with the biggest budget in the league. They are a side that are going to have to make clever decisions rather than go all out for a promotion. And maybe based on his recent experience, Paul Heckingbottom is the man for that. Interesting also, manager instead of head coach, which is not something we often see in a championship now. But I think he's sort of set out his stalls pretty well. And it's similar to what he came into at Sheffield United after a terrible start in the championship. The short-term goals to get back on track and then longer term to be really competitive in this league, which I think the fans won't be too expectant. I'm not sure there's many Preston fans that are looking at this season now and thinking, God, we've got to be in that top six. But I think the next paragraph has summed up the way a lot of fans have reacted, which is he wants to play in a way that they can enjoy and get the best out of the players. Now, I could argue Ryan Lowe in terms of discipline and organisation did that for large parts last season. But they're a side, quite frankly, that in league fixtures at the end of last season and the start of this hasn't scored in 7 games. And as a fan, that isn't enjoyable to watch. And I can go even from a Luton point of view last year. We got relegated from the Premier League. We let in bundles of goals. But we had the longest record for scoring in games. We were attacking. We were taking the game to teams. And that can go a long way as a football fan. We all know that. It isn't just about results. But Heckingbottom is an incredibly experienced EFL manager. He's an incredibly experienced man in the Championship. And he's got a recent record of success at this level, which can only bode well. Perhaps the most exciting thing for Preston fans going back to that promotion season he had 2 years ago was the fact that Sheffield United, yes, they lost more games than even Luton, who finished third, but they got 73 goals, the third highest in the Championship. They didn't concede many, and he seemed to find that balance between, yes, being productive defensively, as I'd argue Preston have been for a lot of the last couple of years under Ryan Lowe, but also having a real goal-scoring threat. Now, that was underpinned by a few decent strikers at the football club at the time. But Preston, if they can get the best out of people and maybe add 1 or 2 into their ranks before the end of August, which this timing does allow him to do, could be really important. And I think for Preston fans, it's just wanting to see a few goals at last, which I don't think is too much to ask for, quite frankly. They were dismal under interim management away at Swansea at the weekend. They offered nothing going forward against Sheffield United on the opening day, and a bit like towards the end of last season against those bigger sides, they were just sitting there waiting to be beaten. They were setting up not to lose a game. And when you're at home, that's a very hard thing to take when you've been a competitive Championship side for years. And you look at the fact that Preston, well, back in that 22-23 season, they didn't even score a goal a game. Last season, yes, they did score a few more, but they were still the lowest scorers in that top 10 of the Championship. They were also outscored by 4 of the teams in the bottom half of the division last season as well, and obviously did finish woefully. So there is a little bit of turning round to do. He mentions getting back on track, and he is right on that regard, because Preston have had a pretty poor run of it, well, generally since the first 8 games of last season. I know there was a little spell about 2/3 of the way through when they did play those bottom sides again, but Preston haven't looked convincing since about this time last year when they got off to that flying start against opposition that, as we alluded to at the time, on paper was a bit more friendly. But you look at this run of games coming up for Preston and you can see how important it's going to be. Of course, take away my bias, you do expect Luton to be up there this season. I know it's not been the best of starts, but that's a great game to get a new manager bounce at home just to show a bit of attacking intent. Then it's League 2 opposition in the EFL Cup. Oxford away, who are expected to be down there despite their good start. Middlesbrough away, who've been struggling for goals after the international break. Blackburn at home in a Lancashire derby, another side expected to struggle, who have lost a hatful of players again this summer. And then Millwall and Watford after that, sides that by many are expected to be mid-table or lower this year. It does become a really important run for Preston North End, combined with the end of the transfer window as well. It is going to be a telling period. One of the things we have seen from Paul Heckingbottom's sides is playing off that focal point off front, whether it was someone like a McBurney at Sheffield United. If you go back to his other main success back at Barnsley in 2016-17, you had the likes of Adam Armstrong and Tom Bradshaw in attacking areas. There were always focal points, players that were going to be able to contribute in those attacking positions. And that's something that's going to be very important for them this year as well. Obviously, there's about 10 days to go in the window. It has been a difficult one for the club. Alan Brown's Sunderland was a loss, whichever way you look at it. Obviously, they've brought in a couple of loan players, youngsters who are unproven in attacking positions. Sam Greenwood wasn't exactly fluent last year in the Championship, wasn't a regular goal scorer, albeit a very clever player. Can Kessler-Hayden can get forward from Aston Villa. But again, is he going to be the answer in terms of creativity? Of course, they've gambled on a winger as well from Utrecht. They've brought in reinforcements in midfield, but there aren't really 3 or 4 options for a regular goal threat at the minute. And I wonder if that's going to be the thing that's addressed before the end of the month. So I think Paul Heckingbottom will bring in some sort of experienced striker that he may have worked with before. And I do think he'll show a bit more attacking intent with the team generally, because there are still some decent players at Preston. I know I predicted them to be in trouble this season, but that was largely because of the situation off the pitch and the lack of investment early in the summer. The fact that it was pretty slow to get going. And obviously the fact that they'd finished our season with an absolute stinker. In the end, I thought they'd survive relatively comfortably, but I didn't think they were going to be pushing near the top half. That could change this year with the right additions up front. We saw Will Keane had a good season at times last year. We know players such as Emil Riis-Jacobsen can score goals at this level too. But I do think there's going to be the need for maybe one more addition in that area, if not more. For Paul Heckingbottom, though, the task is simple. Score goals, show intent in games to be on the front foot, particularly at home, and get the fans back on side, because there has been a bit of an apathy creeping in. And Preston is a club with a fan base that will get behind the team if they've got something to cheer about and can easily go and start pushing back towards that top half of the table. So for me, I think this is a pretty solid appointment. Based on his last job, it's a very good one. There have been a couple of blotches on the record, but generally they're clubs where he wasn't given much time at all. The Leeds stint, it was 16 games at the end of a season. But either way, I think it's a solid appointment. I think based on the fact I said Preston might be an outsider to get involved in that relegation scrap this year, I think this appointment will change that. I think it will make sure they're comfortable, but I'm not sure that at this stage they can go and push on. No, Sheffield United fans remember what I said 3 years ago. Pretty much word for word what I said about them, and they ended up in a playoff semi-final and then getting promoted the following year. So shows what I know, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what I think though. What do you think if you're a Preston fan? Do you agree or disagree with this appointment? Is there anyone else you would rather have seen from the available candidates? Do you think he's the right man to get the goals flowing, to get the side back attacking and back up the table with a few results on the board? Let us know down in the comments what you think. If you're a fan of another championship club, what do you make of the appointment? Do you think Paul Heckingbottom will be a success? No point asking whether they see out their contract in the championship, though at Preston you've got more chance than most in fairness. But do you think he'll be successful at Preston? And where do you think they'll finish this season? For me, mid-table, and yes, Paul Heckingbottom, if given time and a little bit of backing, will be a relative success. But if you did enjoy this one, a little brief overview of the Paul Heckingbottom appointment, then please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. You can see our weekend predictions for match week 3 in the championship up in the eye above. Come and get involved there. Give us your score predictions in the comments every match week. And if you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out in the following episode. You can also find our pre-season predictions for all of the EFL leagues and National League up there too. And join us on Twitch on Friday evening as we'll be watching the big Yorkshire derby and having a football chat while Sheffield Wednesday versus Leeds United takes place. For now though, go and check out the prediction show. I'll see you back here on Friday for the live stream. Thank you very much for watching, for joining along. And to Preston fans, I wish you the best of luck for the season, apart from in his first game against my beloved Luton Town.